You're listening to All Things 3D, where we talk about the world of fabricating, designing, and capturing in the third dimension.
You mentioned in the introduction to Bonk that your goal was to not embarrass your stepdaughters. What does your family think of the topics that you have and the books you have to collect to do research?
Yeah, that was my goal. You're right. And here's what happened. My stepdaughter, Lily, hadn't read a book of mine yet, and she goes, the sex one, I'm going to read this one I'm going to read. And then she heard about the scene with her dad, and she went, and I'm like, I'll just tear those pages out. It's only 2 pages, you don't have to read it. No, but so, and for Bonk, I was in Miami, and my in-laws live in South Florida, and they all came to the bookstore, and I remember I told the story that I shared with you about the ultrasound machine, and they were there in the audience, and I just tried to position myself so that other people's heads were completely blocking them. And then afterwards, they left and went back to their house, and I went to my hotel, which was somewhere else, and I asked my husband, like, what did they say? How did they react? And he said, not a word was spoken. They just never, like my father-in-law, his line was, they'd always get a copy of the book, and they were proud in their way, but he'd say things like, I read every word. Yeah, but did you like any of those words? I read like it was this chore. I don't know. But they're lovely. They're lovely people, and they would never want to hurt my feelings, but I think they think I'm really warped.
Hi, someone kind of stole my question about backlash, but I've actually experienced backlash from your book, I guess.
You've experienced backlash?
I have. After reading Stiff, I was like, I was an organ donor, but I'm like, I'm going to be a body donor. Like, I'm going to change my driver's license. And I went in, and the woman at the DMV was very adamant about pushing brochures to me, like, think about this.
You should have given her a copy of Stiff.
After she changed my license, I wrote down Stiff, Hal's Books, Mary Roach, and I gave it.
Thank you. I love that.
And then a second part, I was thinking you were like, oh, book ideas. I'm like, have you ever thought about combining things like maybe Bonk and Grunt? Like you take the sex scene with your husband and you put it on the no gravity plane.
Yeah, I tried actually. I thought about that. Like, yeah. But then
you had a chapter with that in Packing for Mars, didn't you?
There's a zero gravity sexual intercourse chapter. I am not featured though in that. Sadly, in that chapter. Yeah. So
was it in your book?
Morning, everybody. Hi, this is Mike Balzer of All Things 3D. And skip that for now. Let's jump back to that previous video for just a moment. There we go. And I'll pause it. So yesterday evening, I went out to the Mary Roach, I guess, what would you call it, book interview for the book Grunt, but obviously it was a question and answer over a number of, I guess questions over the span of her book titles. If you're not familiar with Mary Roach, she has written quite a few books on the unusual from a scientific, what do you want to call it, aspect of, for instance, stiffs or cadavers and their uses. Bonk, which was, I guess, the science of sexuality. Grunt, which is a book that she just recently, actually it's been out for almost a year now, but looking at the science behind developing things for the military. And so it's pretty funny. I plan to upload the full version over the weekend. It's fairly large. It's about an hour and 29 minutes, but it's really fun. If you're not familiar with her, she's extremely funny. If you're looking for a lot of deep information on the science behind it, you won't find it here. She takes it from a very naive perspective, but asks a lot of very interesting questions. So I would highly recommend one either picking up a book or actually watching the video. But the reason that I am presenting this today is to show that this Well, it appeared that it happened again. So I don't know why they keep doing that to me, but they obviously continue to disrupt me in the middle of my show. I guess I'll have to reach out to Google to, they're obviously identifying if I'm the person who's actually broadcasting. It's a little annoying. So again, I apologize for the disruption. Luckily, it comes right back up. So on that note, this was done with the Views 360. Now, it's more than just a 360 camera. It is a stereo 360. And it does this by using 8 cameras. And let me kind of rotate it a little bit with essentially about a 58 millimeter IPD between the 2 lenses. And there are basically 4. And if you watched the show last week, you'll know that I actually had talked about the camera and actually showed it. But you can go out to their website and you can see it for yourself. It works pretty well. Keep in mind, it's about the same quality as a Gear 360, so I would not call it professional. However, it's very easy to use. It can be set up. It's non-discrete. As you can see there, I basically, they had other video going on, so I had to be discreet. So obviously it's a little lower than I would have liked, but it makes you feel like you're actually at the edge of the stage there, looking up at them, and it gives you a very strong immersion. I'll turn it around, and obviously this is the audience. I have it in a anaglyph mode, so if you've got some of these cool anaglyph glasses, I know everybody does, you might want to go out there and venture. There is a link in the show notes as well that will talk about. I will provide you a link out to a little bit of a teaser 3-minute video, basically the one that I showed in the beginning of the show here, that talks about it, or basically an extract of the full 1 hour and 30 minutes. So I was very pleased. The immersion, obviously the quality could be better, but the next, what do you want to call it, step up is about a $3,500 camera. And then obviously there is the Nokia Uzo, which is astronomical. The one step up is about $3,500, and then the Ozo is like $27,000. So there's something else that we're going to be talking about soon, and that is the new format that Google has come out with that does 180. And there's a couple of reasons for that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that would be great for this type of presentation, which is the theme of our show, Can Passive VR, or as I have coined it, stereo spherical video, bring live theater to everyone. And as you can see in the small demo that I did, especially if you're using this in a VR goggle, let's say Gear VR or even Daydream, or even Cardboard, the immersion quality of actually feeling like you're right there at the stage and listening to the people. Now, it wasn't present here, but the video out on YouTube, as well as the one that I'll upload to Facebook, will have ambisonic sound. If you're not familiar with that, I've talked about that for about the last 3 weeks now. I've been experimenting with it and testing it. The Views has 4 condenser mics in it, and it does provide an ambisonic, what do you want to call it, algorithm to convert 3D audio from it. The effect isn't that dramatic. I get better results out of my my Zoom H2N, but it is there, and you will be able to see it. Now, what's cool about this, even though they're speaking in the mics, and actually I think the speakers are behind them, even though in the stage here you actually see a PA mic. I think the actual speakers that are hooked up to their wireless is in the back. But the audience, when they're laughing or interacting, is very, because it's obviously part of the actual sound field behind the camera, it does give you a presence of actual audience behind you. So it's pretty cool. And again, that will be in the show notes at the end of this, and you'll be able to go out there and take a sneak peek with the full 1 hour and 30 minutes coming a little bit later. Now, I also did a couple of tests using a 220 degree and one of my rummaging in the tech closet, and that is, can you get a 360 stereo from 2 Gear VRs? And I found the results somewhat surprising. And the answer is mostly yes. And I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So I am very, very impressed with, the immersion quality, not so much the video quality, but again, it's an $800 camera. And the next closest thing isn't even out yet, and that will be $3,500. There are other options. Obviously, there are GoPros you can collect together, but these are extremely expensive and very difficult to work with. This is very easy. Basically, it was a time to download it, which I did through, I don't know why they chose to use a USB. I'm assuming it's a USB 2 port. It's a micro USB, but I think the actual format protocol is USB 2. So the actual transfer, in this case, I think it was like an 80 gigabyte file, was fairly slow. I could have pulled out the micro SD card. I did not choose to do so, and I regret it. It took about 30, 45 minutes to actually download it. The transfer rate, the first time that I created the render was about 40 minutes, but I didn't choose any of the more advanced features. After the first time, I had some, as you can notice in this, there is, and I think this might be a camera issue, somebody else has reported it. Notice the stitch line here, but instead of just a stitch line, it does have a little bit disjointed. There is like this huge area of fog, and then obviously it clears up on the left-hand side of the image there. But somebody else has reported this, so I'm going to talk to them and see if this is a technical issue. It can't be cleared up through any of their filtering processes where they can minimize the amount of stitch filtering. It just seems to be part of the aberration, and I don't know if that is something that's always in the camera or just in mine. So I'm a little disappointed from that perspective. But other than that, yeah, it's, I think, pretty cool. And so check back later for the links, and then check back probably on Sunday for the full interview. Pretty happy with it. And all right, let's move on into basically our first item, which is, I think I'll go ahead and stick with our topic today, which is the Google stuff. So let me get the right camera. So let me jump to my screen. There we go. And we'll fade over to it. So Google VR, as you know, they've talked about, obviously doing a lot of 360 stuff, but they now have this new format called VR 180. Now, essentially all that means is they're taking a 180 portion of your 360, but more importantly, it is in stereo. And what they found with, and especially since I've been doing this for a while, is that you normally have to, especially for high definition 360 in stereo, you have to have what they call over and under technique, where literally you have the same resolution image twice. Now that obviously increases the bandwidth that's necessary to provide good quality. So the way that they're getting around this, and this is what I did with my little test video of converting Prometheus into a spherical, is that you essentially only take the first 180 degrees, because they found through their own testing, if you remember, they brought this up last week, using heat mapping, that people basically only look in front of them. And with that being the case, 180 is more than adequate. I think actually it should have been extended out to 220, but any further motion has to be compressed and converted, and that obviously takes more data, and more importantly, requires more bandwidth to push it. With 180, you can essentially black out the back of the screen and still provide great detail and resolution, at the same data rates. So one of the things that they have is you can watch a few demos, which I actually downloaded, so we can actually take a look at the format. And then also they're going to be coming out with cameras. Now, this is not the camera, I'm assuming, that was used to actually record these little test demos. And I'll tell you what I think the cameras is in a little bit. But you can go out, and this will be in the show notes, or you can find it yourself. Let me jump to it. Essentially a series of them that you can look at. I downloaded this one. Now, keep in mind, I use a tool called 4K Downloader, which does load the original files with all the 360 information. Highly recommended. Then you can bypass some of the limitations if you have a slow, what do you want to call it, data rate from your provider. This might be the best way to view it. Plus, you can then use them later on. All right, so let's take a look at that video real quick. Let me bring it up. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump to my screen.
This is the camera that we always
right, so
use
behind
for
me
videos. It shoots in 4K. It's been a great camera for us.
But then what are we
the
filming
rubber
on?
band ball
That's
video.
the question. Right now, if you were watching
what
this on
they
your
show
phone
here
or
is
on your computer,
essentially
it's looking like a normal video, right? It just seems like
faded
everything's
edge,
good. It's in 4K.
side
But
by
it
side
is not
video.
normal right now. If you want to continue
Here,
watching
the
this
leak
video
is
the
so
same
sharp.
way that you are right now, you can do that.
There you go. So you essentially side by side that they bring in, and let's see what the video format is. Here we go. File info is 3840 by 2160 is so it's not, it's basically 2K per eye, which I thought it would be more than that, but that's essentially still being 2K per eye. Now keep that in mind. That means you could probably get by with two 1080p cameras with, well, I shouldn't say that. You probably want to go with, no, I guess since it's using all 2K per eye. So there are a number of action cameras, and I will show a little version that I've created that can create this effect. And then let's see what else. We're going to actually push this. Since I can't do 180, I can convert it to 360, which I will. And we will go side by side. So there you go. And if you've got your anaglyph glasses, you should be able to see 3D. Now, why they didn't actually enable this feature within these videos themselves, I'm assuming they're probably wanting to actually have you try on your Daydream or your Cardboard to see these. And the other thing is, if you notice, even though it seems to be flattened a little bit as we're watching it, when you actually put on, there's probably a meta tag, when you actually put on your Daydream, or if you've got Gear VR and can watch YouTube videos, it will actually pan it out to a full 180, and you can look around. And I found it very impressive. But I found if the the action, or in this case the two presenters here, move outside the frame, you want to have, at least with me, you have a tendency to kind of follow them, and then that kind of breaks the illusion as they go outside that. So obviously they're haven't done this before and they're practicing it, but it is kind of neat to see the stuff jump out at you. But that's been 360 in the past. What I have found very immersive about 360 in a VR perspective or in a headset is the fact is that you have completely separated left and right views. You don't have, in this case, the anaglyph images that have a merge function in between them that kind of bleed, that kind of take away from that spatial information that your eyes require. And I think a VR headset does a much better job of that. So kudos to them. Also, these images are really crisp, even at the 4K resolution, because obviously all you're looking at is two 2K side-by-sides that are then stretched out to 180. And I thought the quality was pretty good. Now, again, that might be the cameras they use, which more than likely, and I'll jump back to my other screen. Let me pause that. And it might be because, let's see, it probably won't be these. And let's see, I think they see if they actually have the camera. Yeah. So they don't actually show it. Let's see what Lenovo has. Okay, so they're just talking about the headset they'll be coming out with. They say they might have a camera as well. So here's my thoughts on the camera that they're using. And if you go to some of the videos, you can actually see it. Because one video is kind of like an interview with 3 camera setups, so you can actually see them. I think it's this camera here. It's the Blackmagic 4K and maybe even the 2K version, as you can see there. And with the proper lens on the front of it, you could probably do that. Now keep in mind, this camera is, if I remember correctly, about $1,300. Yeah, you'd have to go back. It's about $1,300, and that's not including lens. So let's say you added $300 to $500 lens to that. You're looking at about $1,800. So just for 2 cameras, you're going to be spending about $3,500, $3,600. Then you need the frame that needs to be fairly beefy to keep them stationary. So that could be an issue. So you need to look at that. But these are pretty cool cameras. Obviously a good excuse if you want to get into 4K. They're compact enough to be able to move or use them side by side. You just need a fisheye lens about 180 degrees. I would probably suggest something around 200. And then essentially they'll probably have a little package to bring them together. I use Metal Skybox, which does a great job for what I've been working on, and I'll show that in a moment. So there you go. That's what I'm assuming they're using. It looks like these cameras. And again, the quality is really good. More importantly, they use a larger sensor. It does not indicate like their 1080p version that it's a 16 millimeter. So I don't really know. I actually haven't read it completely through, but it is a large sensor. It also allows you to have a full range of stops. So you may not even need this. There might be some other cameras out there that can provide even more capability, or in obviously a lesser amount. So I would think maybe $300 to $400 cameras like GoPros with at least 180 degree FOV would be more than adequate with this, and you could get some really stunning results. So I'm going to be keeping up with this to see what they're going to be using for their meta tags to allow this. But if you want to go out and check it yourself, it'll be a link in the show notes, or you can jump out to the 180 or VR180 hashtag, and you should be able to find it. So yeah, I'm with this or 360. I can see a stage presence being very easily set up to provide that first-person view that provides that depth information that you get from plays and interviews on stage that you can't get from TV, and actually give you that feeling of being there. So if you can't make it either due to illness or just location, I think this is going to be a super way of moving forward with this kind of stuff. And in fact, I was more absorbed by the material not having to be in the audience and having, obviously being around other people, because I had my own little seat in the comfort of a couch or other seat to be able to view this. And I thought that was pretty cool. Obviously you can't move your head around other than to rotate it, but we've actually shown that might be coming as well. Probably very expensive, but that will be coming as well. All right, let's start moving into our other items. So here is an update from the past. If you know, we actually interviewed Croteam some time ago. It does look like they'll be bringing later on this year to the HTC Vive their cool little game. There's a little video. So I didn't want to do that. The Talus principle, and there's a little video of it being used. If you wanted to explore this, you could go actually to, what's it called, Destination, which is the 3D VR working tools in HTC Vive, actually from Valve themselves, and they did create a demo in there. If you look at the little video here of this walkthrough, it kind of looks like that. But it won't really have any game interactivity. There's a little bit of things that you can do in it, but not like the game itself. So if you're not familiar with it, go out and check the destination demos. There's other cool things, including one that I created in the Valve system. And just download it if you've got an HTC Vive. And I think you can probably run it on an Oculus and get an idea of what this will be like. So if you're not familiar with the Talos principle, it is like a 3D puzzle type game. And obviously they're showing you one here, but there are other things that you have to line up, like lasers and other to open up gates and so forth. And it's really kind of cool and really immersive. And now to be able to bring that to 360, I think is kind of just somewhat of a no-brainer. Glad that they're doing it. Also, Croteam creates another, and the name escapes me now, but if you want an all-out, what do you call it, 3D blasting first-person shooter, gosh, I can't think of the name. Maybe it'll come to me later. They have that in VR as well. So check out Croteam. I think they've got some cool stuff coming ahead. All right, let's move on into technology. And I'm going to stay on the VR augmented reality thing today because Chris is still on vacation. Actually got back late. Got a late email to this morning saying he got in too late and decided to not join us today. So I'm on my own, which means we'll get through this fairly quickly. All right, so a new startup of some new Nokia employees are trying to create or fix the VR problem, which is limited resolution. They're doing this by piggybacking a very high resolution, and I think it says like 20 times the resolution, or I'm sorry, 70 times the clarity of what you have now. And here they give you a demonstration of what can be possible through their little screens, and then what can be seen. Now, obviously, this is not the full screen. It is only the area of the eye that has the highest resolution. So like our eyes, normally our main concentration of rods and cones is in the front of the eye. And then during our peripheral vision, we do not have the same number. So our resolution is less. They are trying to mimic that. And as you can see here, the comparison of resolution is amazing. And even more amazing is that they might have something out next year. So really looking forward to that. Obviously, do they say that here? The pricing of this, and here's another example showing the clarity of the screen versus what you normally see. I mean, that's just amazing. So, I have another article here, and it's talking about the resolution of the Oculus HTC Vive. Here's the actual prototype. They did say that the wires are somewhat clumsy, but obviously that'll all be cleaned up. Looks like you probably have a micro HDMI as well as a micro USB powering both of these. Interesting, the little heat sinks on top of the actual sensors themselves. Oh well, looking forward to that. It didn't indicate any cost that I could see, but it's probably at this point more of a concept with some practical stuff coming out in the near future. The other news on high resolution is Samsung. It looks like they may come out with their own VR headset that will have a PPI, that's pixels per inch, of 2,000. Now, immediately you think, wow, that's extremely high versus what we have now on the Galaxy S8, Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus, which is 570 and 529. But keep in mind, PPI is how many pixels per inch. So if you make the actual image sensors at a higher resolution in a smaller format, that'll push that up. So if you go from the 2560 14 and just basically create a quad version, 4K by 4K, you will get to 2000 PPI. There is strong rumors. They have sensors that have that capability already. We've talked about it before. And if that will be the case, then they'll be able to push that out. And they say sooner than later. No, obviously, again, no idea on the cost of it, but this could be happening sooner than later. For those of you who think, well, what good is that in a mobile headset with a mobile SoC? Won't be able to drive it at that performance. We can barely drive what we've got. Just keep in mind with hardware upscaling, you could reduce the amount of screen door effect and actually through some hardware techniques enhance the edge resolution using these 4K. And in my own experience of working with the Pimax, it does make a difference even at just 1080p going with a 4K screen. So I'm really looking forward to this one as well. So we really will be having higher resolution screens sooner than later. In fact, maybe as soon as CES of 2018. We shall see. So I'm pretty stoked with that. All right, let's move on into design architecture. And this is a tool I kind of stumbled onto. This is from a company out of Jordan, believe it or not, that creates a product called Simlab Composer. And I just kind of, like I said, stumbled. In fact, I was looking at some video on YouTube and I came across this. And this is a little video, or a little video, actually, I do have a little video, so I'll probably play that right now. Let's see, where are we? There we go. Now, like I said, I stumbled upon this, and they have different modules, as you can see behind me. They have a light edition that's free. There are some limitations to that, like the maximum resolution. They have a pro edition, which is $199, and then they have this new VR version. Now, I didn't price the other two that they have here, which is the Ultimate and the Mechanical Edition. But what this does is it allows you to import files from like SketchUp, Rivet, and so forth, and then apply. Not only will it render, and it will render VRs as well, it will not do stereo VR, and I don't know why anybody is not doing that. It's not that difficult to do manually, but it would be great to be able to push the camera over to provide the parallax you need for that. But the cool thing is, especially as they showed there in the VR version, which I'm going to jump to right now, is it will provide within the package itself a full VR executable that you can load into Oculus, the HTC Vive. It won't do mobile, but the other cool thing is it does supply everything that's in the Pro version. So you can do what they call baking. And baking, I found, is very important. Now, there are other problems with SketchUp, but one of the things that I had issues with in Unreal is that you can do baking there as well, but you really have to push what they call the light map to a higher resolution. Now, with all your baking being done in here, if you're a Unity fan, you'll be able to create some pretty stunning, realistic stuff without actually having to create lights. And that's extremely important because then you can unlight them, your scene. And this was, if you've been following me, I worked with, gosh, can't think of his name now, but he created the the Van Gogh, and I call it the Inside Van Gogh. I actually used it to walk around in, but his whole process was baking everything in, and essentially just turning everything off, and it makes it very easy and better performing in a mobile system. So you can do the same thing with this program. Now keep in mind, baking, especially in this application, and especially my house design, took a long time. I'm saying like 24 hours. And I don't know, maybe I didn't have a GPU setting on it. So it does take a while. Now, again, my SketchUp has not been optimized. There are colliding meshes. There's a lot of issues with it. So I would, this is not a lazy way of creating great results. You still have to go in and optimize your mesh information. But all these tools that are available in this, and I'll go back to the Pro version in a moment, allow you to do it inside. So you basically bring a SketchUp file or some of these others directly into it. They're included in the Pro and the VR version. And then you can bake them. Then you can export them either as a VR, as they show you here. The other cool thing with the VR, here's an example with the baking. In fact, I actually saw this VR demo on the HTC Vive, but you can essentially, as I've been trying to demonstrate, click different materials, and then it would change the countertops to these. And if you bake all of the lighting into each of these materials as you switch them, then you'll get the same appearance. Then they also have their own built-in VR viewer. And then here's the HTC Vive, and I actually was using this on the Oculus, but we actually were looking at that earlier. They have their built-in navigation function. So when you click on something, an action will be performed, as you saw in the video there. And then you can do 360 panoramas. And again, as I mentioned, I wish they would do stereo as well. And maybe I just haven't found it yet. And then they're also looking at AR. So I could see this being utilized. And I plan to show a little demo next week. Even without this, you'll be able to, even with the Pro version, now again, remember this is $400. If we jump back to the Pro version, you have all the import-export functionality that you need. And then you could actually export a complete collada file that you can then bring in to SceneKit or an FBX file directly into Unity and create a tabletop AR using SceneKit. And I will do a demo because I've already converted, but I'll probably go with a smaller, the bathroom version that I've worked on previously. And then I'll be able to walk around it while it's on my table. So it'd be kind of like a dollhouse experience. So they show the advantages of their baked-in textures. It gives you a much more realistic experience. And then you can just import it into Unreal or Unity without having to do any further baking. Pretty cool, and I really like it. Now, I did have to go through there and change all my materials in Unity to unlit, but you can just essentially highlight all of them, click unlit, and it's super easy. It takes less than a minute to do so. So if you're not familiar with it, you can get the light version for free, $200 for the Pro and $400 for the VR version. So, go ahead and download it and play with it. It's pretty cool. All right, so let's move on to our next item. And my tablet went to sleep with my notes on it. So let me jump and bring that back up. All right, so what do we have now? Okay, this was also pretty cool. This is another program that I've been using and I've talked about, and I just found out a couple days ago that Adobe now has bought Metal Skybox tools and will be including them in the creative tools. If you're getting the, like I have, the subscription to the creative tools, it will now be built in by the end of the year. You can actually, I don't know if the blog says it, but you can actually email them and ask them, hey, I'm already a creative content, or what, I can't remember what they call their CC. I'm already a subscriber. Can you go ahead and provide me links to the application? I actually bought the Skybox Studio 2, but I was planning to buy a couple other tools. Now I won't have to. I'm not complaining. In fact, I don't think they identify it here, but if you bought it within the last 10, 15 days, you can get a full refund if you have the Adobe CC license for the full package. Obviously, that doesn't include Photoshop and the what's the other tool? Can't think of it right now. But you have to have the full complement of tools, including After Effects and Premiere, in order to take advantage of that. But you'll also be able to get their tools if you write to Adobe personally. I don't know how long that will take. I'll let you know next week. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about this. And I don't know. I mean, Adobe's done a pretty good job of some of the other applications that they have purchased of keeping them up and then including them. So yeah, I think it's pretty exciting. Okay, well, let's move on to the next item, and that is 3D scanning. Oops, I'm sorry, 3D in medicine. I thought this is pretty interesting. I've kind of been taking a take in the 3D medicine of looking at biochemical processes using 3D fabrication. And this is another collagen, kind of like an inkjet process that creates collagen based on plant tissue in order to create scaffolding. We talked about that before, using collagen to create the scaffolding for other tissues to build upon. And it appears that they're well ahead. Now, this looks like a render, so I don't know if they actually have a practical experience or excuse me, practical version for you to work with. But the fact is that they have a patent established on it. We'll probably be seeing more soon on this technique. But as I just showed you, we have Jordan as well as Israel. They're really pushing in the 3D and fabrication area. And so very interesting. Okay, let's move on to scanning. Okay, now we're here. So one of the things that you may or may not be aware of is that they've taken 3D sensors, and there's a couple of ways of doing that, either taking a depth sensor and attaching it to a drone, or as we had in an interview some time ago, just having a drone fly past an object and then taking a series of images and then taking the distance between them to create a parallax effect and then creating the depth information. That's great for providing depth of the ground. But in this case, they're actually scanning the, this is the Coton Court, but let's go further down, the Statue of Liberty. And essentially they're able to scan around it, but more importantly, they use algorithms to minimize the number of sweeps so that they can reduce the amount of time that it actually has to go around the object to scan it. So I thought that was pretty cool that we're now seeing learning algorithms in order to reduce the amount of time in the scanning process. And they say yeah, without the algorithm, it would take 51 minutes. And what did they say? Yeah, 30 minutes, almost half the time using the algorithms. So I think that's pretty neat. They don't actually identify what their scanning unit is, but I've seen depth, like connects being connected to this, and obviously parallax techniques being used too. I also think that there's somebody who's created a very compact, I can't think of it now, but Trimble uses it. So loss of memory. But the fact is there are several techniques and they're all being compact enough to put on the bottom of a large drone. And so we're going to be seeing more large objects being scanned in this method. And this obviously will help reduce the time because, as you're probably aware of, if you've done any drone flying, you have a limited amount of time that you can be up in the air. So obviously reduce the amount of time and sweeps necessary. You can be able to get this all in one charge. All right, let's move on to, we just went over the Google 180 earlier in the show, so we'll jump right over to my rummaging in the Tech Cave boys. So we're getting through this episode fairly quick. All right, so as mentioned before, I had backed this Kickstarter and finally received it, and it was the Nolo. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump to my main camera. And bring them up, and I'll bring up the components one at a time. So here is the base station. So essentially, from my understanding, the technology behind this is that it uses both a spinning laser system for both horizontal and vertical, but it's front based. So all it does is determine your positioning in space from an XY perspective. The Z information is coming from a unique device which allows them to use only one of these, and that's an ultrasonic transducer. So that's where its depth information is coming from. So I think that's pretty cool. I've already turned it on, and you hear the whir of the motors. So that's essentially, and then you can actually see the glow, very similar to what you see in an HTC Vive tracker. And then the tracking units themselves looks like this, and this is what gets mounted to the headset. And I've already created a bracket for my, I've now changed the name of it, but the Neodi VR Uplay is now the Neodi IO Play. And so I'm able to mount this on the front of it. And the way this works is, I don't know why it's this thick, unless the circuit board is that. But essentially, this is an array of infrared sensors as well as the ultrasonic, I'm assuming, transducers. And it's picked up by the base unit to determine where it's in X, Y, and Z information. The demos I've seen are fairly responsive, and I'll get to that in a moment, or I should say the lack of them. So as mentioned, here's the Neodi IO Play. I'm going to mount it to the bracket that I've attached to the top, and this will be built into the actual phone bracket. So then you just slide it in like that, and then it mounts. The unit is fairly light. It doesn't add any extra weight to it. And then with the bracket, it keeps it level, and then you'll be able to move around. But again, I haven't tested it, and I'll explain why. So besides that, it also comes with 2 hand controllers. And the 2 hand controllers are, can you say quality plastic? I don't know, but as you can see, it has the 2 sensors on top, or emitters, and a plethora of buttons, very similar to an HTC Vive. And there are 2 of them, and their quality, and I compared it to the Samsung controller that just came out. It actually feels better. It has, like the Samsung controller, it actually has batteries. No, actually, I'm sorry, it does not. This USB based, so you have to make sure they're charged. But it does come with a charging cable with 3 adapters, so it can actually charge all 3 units, meaning the base unit and the 2 controllers together, which I thought was a nice touch. It is a standard 5 volts, so if you're on the go, you can actually charge it and run it with a 5 volt, lithium ion battery pack. You have 2 different cables that you can use to run it. You can use this one here, the smaller one that connects directly to the phone. Works fine with my unit. And then they obviously have a longer version. And these are actually, and with this one, if you've got a phone that has a USB-C, it has that attachment, or the standard micro USB if you've got like a Gear. So one other thing it comes with, and there's a reason it did, is a longer cable so you can attach this to a standard headset besides a mobile headset. So there lies the problem. You have this cool hardware, but there is very limited actual mobile support for it. And let me jump back out to the website. So if you go through their store, the only thing that you can buy, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this up now, you can pre-order it. But unlike the Kickstarter, where I think I got mine for $89, and that was an early bird, standard people were able to get this for $99, standard Kickstarter backers. Now, if you want to pre-order, they push the price up to $199. And some people are saying that that's kind of a deal breaker, because for $199, you still need a headset as well as a mobile device. Mobile devices, you may already have one, so that may be a no-brainer. But if you want to hook this up to a headset, you still have to purchase a headset, and they can be anywhere between $300 to $500. And with the newer standalone headsets having tracking built into them, at $200, this may be a little bit more of a problem in purchasing. In fact, I probably would not have purchased it if it was at this price. At $100, I think it'd be a no-brainer. Some people think $150 would be okay. Now, you're asking, or maybe not, what about Software. Well, the only thing they're really supporting at this time is this V-Ridge RiffCat, which is about, I think, $50 if I remember correctly, a standalone. But if you get a, you can get a riff code, excuse me, a riff code for $209 included in your Nolo kit. And what does that do? It allows you to essentially mimic and use your headset with the HTC Vive and these tracking units and play HTC Vive games. The problem from a mobile perspective is that it's still at most 60 frames per second, probably less than that because it is not a direct optimized for this type of system and that headset. So you're not getting a real experience. And with the Oculus now, you can buy the whole thing for like $600 to $700. Is this now worth it? I was hoping to actually see some demos, APKs that I could download and actually experiment with it. Sadly, there isn't any. If you go out to their forums, they had a contest. Let's see. Yeah. They don't actually talk about it. Oh, well, so they don't actually talk about it, but they had a contest, and that seems to be gone now. Or maybe I just can't see it. But that actually oh, here we go. No, that's the forum rules. But it allowed you to essentially apply to make an app for it, and then they would send you a developer kit if they picked one of your ideas. But again, no actual APKs for mobile. Now, if you are a developer like I am, you can go out, let's go back to this, to their developer area, and they already have a Unity SDK that you can download. And I haven't, again, tried it. I plan to have that done by next week so that you can create Unity-driven stuff for mobile. Supposedly, it will support the Gear VR as well as Daydream. Again, I have not tried it. I don't know. As well as Cardboard. There are Windows drivers as well as SDK. So if you wanted to use this in a Windows environment, you could do so. And then there's the Android. So if you want to support it directly with an Android, what is not available yet is the Unreal plugin, and unknown when that will be coming. So that's it. So if you wanted to do this on your own, creating mobile Android stuff, you're going to have to do it. There is no demos of it. They are completely relying on this RiffCat. And frankly, I don't really have a need for it. I can, I guess, go back out to the Kickstarter and send a little bit more money. I think it's like $10 and get this with my unit. I may or may not do that, but right now I didn't want to spend the money for that because, like I said, I already have an Oculus as well as an HTC Vive. Why would I need to use in my opinion, a less than desirable way of working with it? Now, the other thing that people have complained about with this unit, and again, I haven't tried it, that this is front-facing only, very similar to the original Oculus. So you can move your head around, move it back and forward, but if you go outside its ranges, especially with the hand controllers, you lose control. More importantly, if you turn around, you'll lose tracking control. So what they have suggested is you mount this on a ceiling so that it projects down, and the sensors themselves will be tracked in a more room scale. Now, I don't know how large that room is. Again, that's something that needs to be tested, but they don't provide the brackets. You have to 3D fabricate it. And if I go out to their GitHub, you'll see that they have the repositories for the different SDKs. And let's see, go out to here. No, sorry. It appears, interesting. There we go. Maybe this is it. Yeah. So you can actually jump out to the 3D printing and grab the STLs for the ceiling mount, as well as another mount, which is different from the one that's included. But I was able to modify this. I requested for them to send me the actual mechanical file, a step file to actually embed directly into it. They have not replied. They actually have been very reluctant to work outside of their small area. I don't know why. The fact is that it's going to cost more is an issue. But you can get the mount for the top. I would probably build something or mount something on the bottom of this so that like a tripod mount, so then you can mount it and screw it on, then have to make this large plastic adapter that you plug it into, and they say may scrape it. So that might be the direction I'll go. Also, since there is no tripod mount on the bottom of this, it's basically tabletop. And if you want to go outside of tabletop, you're kind of out of luck unless you build your own mount for the bottom, which is probably the direction I will go. I'll probably remove this rubber coating on the bottom here and then apply either with epoxy or some other contact cement a tripod mount to match that. But I'll have more to talk about on that next week. So the other thing I want to talk about, the other thing that I was testing last night was the ability, and let me jump back to my main camera, was the ability to create 360 video only using 2 cameras, and notably, and I had been working on this for some time, but I actually did some real testing earlier in the week, but essentially using 2 Gear 360s. Now, when I did some footage at the Women's March back in February, somebody knocked down, and so I have one of the bubbles, the water seals, that has a scratch in it. So I have to record on the back lenses. But for my purposes, I did try it out, and I'll show you an actual video or image from it. Here we go. Oops. Oh, come on. Well, that's odd. There we go. So here is the actual image. Now, I did this fairly quickly and only did this through a cheap editing program. But essentially what you need to do is convert them into equirectangular and then just use over and under. The important thing is when you're setting this up, and let me jump back to my main camera. Is making sure they're lined up. And this could be a problem with the spherical cameras here because, you know, it's difficult. So what I use is the seam to line them up. I do plan to create like a 3D printed bracket that fits over the front of it, and it's a size to kind of keep them in place, and then you kind of just snap them in. But remember that since these are 180 cameras, anything that obstructs this ridge here is going to be a problem. The other thing is, and I don't know if you can see it here, if you look at, and I'll jump back to it, you can actually see in the image here the bubbles from the lenses themselves. And the way to get around that is basically blend them out like they do with standard stitching. But, you know, a lot of people complain, well, you don't get true stereo 360 all the way around. But, you know, I found that surprisingly good. And as I talked about earlier, you're not going to essentially, from your peripheral vision, have the 3D information you do in front of you. And obviously, when you move your head to the side, as indicated by Google, you're not really going to be doing that to get 3D information per se. Now, it may or may not, but I still had 3D information even as I rotated to the left and right. So I was very surprised in the results. So what that means is, you know, I think the older balls are better, but if you get the newer ones with the handles for, I think you can get them for like $150. So $300, you can get yourself a stereo 360 system that works pretty good. Now, keep in mind, the software does not support activating them both remotely. You'd have to either have 2 phones. I think they had these Bluetooth controllers at one time. Let me jump back to my other screen. So essentially, you'd have to get like a Bluetooth controller to basically start and stop them. Or, as I do, I just press the buttons. Now, the other thing that you need to do and ensure that you're running on the same frames is I use a clapboard, or in my case, just clap your hands together in front of it. That will synchronize the two audio cues with the frame, and then you'll be able to make sure they're synced. Now, there is still a possibility of having some 1/30th of a second judder, but I found it to be not very noticeable. In fact, I found that most of these stereo cameras, because they're at 1/30th, by walking between the cameras, you still get some frame, what do you want to call it? I can't think of the word now, but essentially some stuttering because you're shifting between one camera and the other at 1/30th of a frame. So you would probably have to push this up to like 120 frames per second to minimize that effect as well, or have complete synchronization in your camera systems, which I have not seen yet. But this is a low cost way to do it. And plus, if you looked at the video that I'll put up with the Mary Roach interview, that these are off to the side, so I'll have footage to show later on as well. So if you don't want to buy these and you only want to go with, let's say, what the new YouTube 180 format, there are a few cameras, and these are some that I bought in October of last year, and actually demoed them when my wife had foot surgery. But I have now removed the domes in front of the lenses, which was just another layer. And I found that even with the Gear 360, it adds a glare, especially with bright surfaces, that you don't need. So if you remove it on these little cameras, and what are they? These are called the T360s. They're a Chinese camera. The quality is okay, and they have a pseudo what they call 4K. It's not 4K. It's essentially what they call 4K is they're multiplying the XY pixels in order to say it's 4K. It is not a true 4K camera. However, it is a 2.3K by 2.3K square format. So each of these cameras can provide that. That's great to work with because since they use obviously this is actually 220-degree fisheyes. It's a dome base, and then if you use metal skybox, you can put in the 220 degrees and then put these in a standard what they call dome to equirectangular, and then basically do an over and under with the equirectangular. Now, I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm assuming that I can create another channel in After Effects to create the over and under. Don't try and do that within this same channel, because the Skybox effects tool or plugin kind of compensates for that. So, and I'll talk about that later once I figure that out. But you should be able to do this all in After Effects. I don't know if this actually has audio. I didn't look at it before. Some people think it does not. So that's not a problem because I record my AmbiX with my Zoom H2N. But I found that the quality of this is actually better, and these cameras are about $130 a piece over the something like the the Samsung Gear 360 cameras, and actually even better than the Views cameras. But again, it's only 220 degrees. But as we're seeing in these new videos and format from YouTube, that shouldn't be a problem. And there are some better ones, but the problem is I like these because they have a square format. If you buy some of the more rectangular ones, you're going to have to essentially invert the cameras, which means a lot of leg work, but it can be done, and you can get true 1K, and they're about a good one. If you want to buy, obviously, essentially a couple of, and they only have like 170 degree, but you can get a couple of the standard GoPros, the Hero 5s do 4K at 60 frames per second. And then there are some Chinese versions of that for about half that price that you can get. But again, they're rectangular, and you'll have to flip them so that they're in opposite directions. This one was kind of nice because both the record buttons were right on top. They do have little Bluetooth, I think they're Bluetooth, remote controls like watches for both of them, but they cannot set them for the same channel, or I don't think that was the case. Maybe I'm wrong. Or you could go with what I talked about earlier, which is the Blackmagic camera, which is obviously much more expensive, but much more, or at least higher quality and better noise, which seems to be a problem that plagues all these smaller sensors. And also they have to compensate for it. And you're seeing, in my case, some ringing along the edges, which creates white haloing, and also just seems to be a lot more noise. And if you try to smooth it out, you obviously lose some of your high frequency. So you're kind of doing a double end battle there. So spend a little bit more on your cameras, and I think you'll be very pleased with the results. And again, with this new 180 showing only a 2K with pretty good quality, you could probably get by with the less expensive, but it's only like $300 less, maybe 400. Their 1080p camera. So who knows? Lots of potential out there. I'll be your eyes and ears as far as what's out there and testing in this area, but I'll actually have some footage from this camera as well, so you can compare them for yourself. So I think that's about it. Let's see, I think I covered everything. So again, thank you for joining me, and that's another episode of All Things 3D for 6/23/2017. And obviously the theme today was, can passive VR spherical video bring live theater to everyone? I think it can, and in fact, I embrace it. All right, bye.